So in a time like this, understanding diverse gifts is as important as anything. For a community to thrive, we need to recognize it, we need to see it, we need to celebrate it. Because while I know this rose will open, I also know that this rose will fade away. It takes strength to honor the truth of things, but we have to. In the cycle of all things, I know that this rose, no matter how well we tend it, will exist in cycles of becoming. The gardeners of all things honor this. They don't deny it. They tend the soil anyway. They mark the passing of seasons. So we too should tend the soil of our own becoming, our communities of becoming, with intention. Both the blooming and the fading are just different parts of the process of becoming and becoming anew. So transformation is this ongoing, constant process. In nature, we can see that a lot of that process happens in cycles of life and what kind of looks like death, like a tree without its leaves and Easter lilies still packed in the bulb under the earth, and even a caterpillar in a cocoon. Now we can use 100 metaphors for spiritual community. Last week, Tobus offered us a flock of, was it sparrows? Darlings, dancing in the sky, sharing the leading and the following. I love that one. And today, what makes a community like a rose bush? And what does a rose or a rose bush have to do with shared ministry? First, I want to recognize that there's a difference between wild roses and cultivated ones. Wild rose bushes make flash mobs and kinds of protests that happen hours after Rodney King was killed, where a right that we've taken for granted has been taken away. Cultivated roses are bushes that are well cared for with some intention and varying levels of skill depending on the location. In many backyards, roses don't have a great time of it, but public rose gardens are renowned, listed. Tourists go to see them all the time. They are purposely meant to be sustainable over time. What if we imagine the rose as the outcomes of our shared work, our service, each using our own giftedness to make it happen? We learned last week that the Greek word translated ministry is indeed service. What if we imagine the roses as an enactment of our principles or programs, or just being together beautifully by intention? The things that make us go together forward to the next right thing, whatever that is. You know, Sean did a great time today talking about a time that he thought that the shared service of lay and professional people was at a good place. And then the chapter that followed with some difficult experiences. Using this imperfect metaphor, our rose bush, well, I'll tell you what, it needs compost and fertilizers at different times in its life. There is such a thing as holy if we choose to accept it. I hope you're all with me. At our workshop last Sunday, I took some time to talk about the tenure of professional ministry, because I've heard several people say, oh, I hope we find another minister that will stay here a long time. The truth is, the average tenure of a UU minister is 5 to 7 years. This is also true for most of Protestant Christianity, and a resident Catholic priest is usually appointed for 6 years. What's that about, you ask? Well, after 5 to 7 years, the thing that a minister does best is still evident. The things that a pastor doesn't do well is very evident. The community might have changed. It may or may not be able to take up the slack with its own talents. There's greater impact. People begin to take notice, and a tipping point happens, one way or the other. Usually a pastor leaves, or they're invited to leave, and there's one more option. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is also the tipping point for most relationships, live-in relationships, marriages. About 5 to 7 years, a couple has to choose whether or not they're going to engage again, to recommit, because they need to address what needs addressing. They see all the points where a sticking point is permanent, and couples usually have 2 or 3 of these that are permanent, and have to seek a way around them and agree to find a way around them. So anyway, 5 to 7 years, the community often needs renewal. That's the other option. Renewal and a rededication to existing or new goals and direction. It needs fertilizer, it needs compost, it needs fresh nourishment, new and reaffirmed direction, a close look at the health of the bush, what will nourish it in its current cycle of living. And there's lots of ways you could do that. One of the other things that it needs, our rose bush, is nutrient or fertilizer. In addition to that, it needs reshaping. It needs cultivation. It needs pruning. Now, what does regular pruning do? It creates an intentional direction for sprouting branches. It provides room for every branch to bloom without interference, for each flower to come to be. It's an organized art of care. So we can apply these things, compost, fertilizer, and pruning, with an intentional way in an ongoing basis, or they happen anyway. Sometimes in community, it's not, as our song goes, the fear that needs to burn away to allow the next blooming, but instead, it's this comfortable place of active inertia. We're doing lots of stuff and we like it. We like it the way it is. We see some leaf spot, but hey, the roses are still coming up, so When we bought our house a few years ago, there was a row of rose bushes that we had no idea how to take care of, not really. By the time we had the instruction from someone who knew, well, it was kind of shocking just how severely they pruned that rose bush. It all had to go in order to allow a reshaping in the next season. And today I try to do a much better job of pruning my rose bushes. I'm going to say, as hard as it is, that pruning is a painful, good thing. It makes new life possible. Coming to a point where we look at our history as a painful, good thing can be very helpful. Maybe we can see that time as simply holy time. And pruning is less painful if we're mindful to do it regularly. Think about this. At UUSM and shared service, lay and ordained, the rose bush is on your property. The professional comes by for a period of time to assist with the rose bush. You do work hand in hand. While you have somewhat different responsibilities, the bottom line is the bush belongs to community. It's yours, and you're responsible to see that it's cared for. Transition, developmental ministry, interim times in between, like we're in now, they're in part about seeing what the rose bush needs and tending to it. You have Thomas and I to help, and we both love this rose bush. It's awesome. So much is in the bud, and it's not ours. It's yours. That being said, in my mind, this community has a fairly well-shaped rose bush. It's cared for, and it's happened many times across your history, this ebb and flow. Even right now, I mean, it's not winter anymore. Spring came, you've done some fertilization, you've done some great work together. We might have a little more pruning to do before the full blooming comes, but I see many roses on the horizon. I hope you do too. We have buds on the branches, but not all those buds have room, and some branches are sort of crossed. We actually have talked about that a lot in different ways in our culture workshop, some last week in the shared ministry workshop. What buds are going to get priority? Where can we reshape that might make it easier to bloom in this next season of our becoming? So let me make the point. We're in the process of becoming and becoming again, of change, of transformation, but this doesn't mean that the past is bad. No, it's best to try to get to a point where we see it all as good. The blooming, the fertilizer, all the chapters that lead us to now, all the ways that it made us who we are at this point. As a matter of spiritual practice, the sooner we can right-size the past into just another part of the everlasting curve, we take honest stock of where we are now, then the sooner we begin to look forward instead of backward into what could be. Because all things are transforming constantly, all things becoming anew. Sometimes for the better, not always, but we can often increase the odds if we're intentional in our choices. As Garrett said, Denise Levertov has a wonderful poem called Beginners. In that poem, she reminds us, so much is in the bud. The poem is used to help us care for the earth, but there's so much more in bud in each of us, in this community, in the world around us. We are the gardeners, should we choose to accept the responsibility. And you know, I actually think this is an inborn kind of thing. Every child eventually wants to improve on what we thought we had done quite well. Thank you. We should probably begin inviting our teens to tell us what they see. And that's the invitation today, if you choose to accept it. Find out from one of our young adults or teens, what do they see that you may not? Do they have a piece of wisdom that they think we might consider as we carry forward into the future? What changes might make UUSM more sustainable for what will be a new becoming of their generation? They're coming, like it or not. I know this rose will open. I know this fear will burn away.